Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and this is going to be my review for The Walking Dead Season 5, Episode 4, Slabtown. And this episode was very different from pretty much any episode we've seen so far this season, because so far this season, it's been basically Rick and the group, we have Rick and the group and everything, and that's basically been, the episodes this season. This episode, however, didn't show anything of Rick and the group, none of it. So, there wasn't any of that. Of course, we didn't get any, Abraham and his group going to Washington, which we are getting in the next episode because they did show that in the promo. But this episode focused primarily on Beth's character, which I personally really enjoyed, because here's the thing. Out of anyone who's had the least amount of development on this show, Beth is the first character that comes to mind, in my opinion. Because Beth really... I love her character. I personally love her character. I mean, she's been through a lot. She's a really good character. They haven't had a lot of time to develop her, and this episode they really did develop her, because having it just be Beth was very, very good. Now, I remember I told you guys I was not a fan of last year's episode where they focused just on the governor. Now, that episode, looking back, I really did enjoy it, but this episode I thought was better than that. It was definitely the weakest episode of the season so far, but I still really enjoyed it because it showed us where Beth has been. It caught us up on, caught us up on where she has been, what she's doing, things like that. I thought that was really cool. So let's just get to it. So we see her, Beth, she opens her eyes, and she's in a hospital room in some sort of bed, and she looks at this ticking clock before getting up and looking out the window at the abandoned city below. And she starts pounding on the door, yelling for someone to let her out of the room, and I'm like, why is she screaming here? So as she hears people approaching from outside, she pulls a needle from the IV in her arm and prepares to use it as a weapon, and a male doctor and a female police officer enter the room. The doctor introduced himself as Dr. Stephen Edwards, and he introduced the officer as Dawn Lerner. They are our two main threats in this episode. They are two people that are holding Beth, and those you can tell right away these are the two people that are holding Beth, and I thought that was really good. So, Beth asks where she is at. Steven says Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. Basically, we can see that Beth had no idea what happened to her. I'm pretty sure they, sedated her or whatever because she seemed very confused. She was not there at first, and I thought that was definitely very interesting. So, Dawn is explaining that they found Beth on the side of the road surrounded by walkers, and Beth asks if the man she was with is here now as well, because of course she was with Daryl. And in my opinion, I think she was asking that because I do think that Beth does have genuine feelings for Daryl. I just feel like she does. And Dawn tells Beth that she was alone, and Dawn says that if they hadn't saved Beth, that she would be one of them right now. So she owes them, because if they wouldn't have saved her, she would have been a walker. So basically, they did not kidnap her. They, in fact, saved her. So Steven takes Beth in to save a patient, and Steven says the patient suffered cardiac arrest and he hasn't been improving, and he turns off the life support, and Beth is surprised and asks if that's it, and Steven says if patients don't show any sign of improvement, then Dawn calls it, and Steven stabs a dead patient in the head to keep him from turning into a walker. Now, I thought this was really interesting because it does go back to what we got last week with Bob, when, of course, Sasha told Tyrese to stab, Bob in the head from stopping him from turning into a walker. Now, my thing is, I'm thinking that many more people are going to start to do this because they don't want more walkers, they want the walkers gone, and that's why they're doing this. So I thought that was definitely very interesting. So Beth is wheeling the dead patient's body down the hospital hallway with Steven, and Steven stops and talks with Dawn and another officer. And Beth keeps on walking and stares at someone cleaning up, and she also spies a woman in one of the hospital rooms, but the woman shuts the door. So she's obviously very confused right now because, of course, she has been out for a while. You can tell, she is now in this hospital. And in many ways, we, the audience, are a lot like Beth. We have no idea where she is. We have no idea what's going on. It's very hard to tell what's going on in this episode. It's very hard. I definitely really like the tone of this episode. The tone of this episode pretty much was like a what the fuck episode because you have no idea where Beth is. You have no idea what's going on with her. And I thought that was definitely really cool. And actually made it a little bit more interesting than the Governor episodes, in my opinion. So she returns back to Steven, and Dawn tells them to go on that the body's getting cold, and Beth and Steven continue to wheel the patient's body. Dawn unlocks the door for them to get to the elevator, and Beth asks Steven how many people live there. And Steven says just enough to keep them going, and Beth asks if they can bury the dead patient, but Steven says they only go out when they need to, and Steven dumps the dead body down an open elevator shaft. So Beth is then getting food at the hospital cafeteria, and an officer tells Beth that she's looking better and introduced herself as one of the ones that found her. So that's definitely really interesting. So the officer says that he's German, and he tells her that when someone does her a favor, it's courtesy to show some appreciation. And Beth ends up ignoring him and continues to put food on her tray. And Gorman says, unless you want me to write down everything you're talking or you're taking, everything costs something, right? So I thought that was definitely very interesting when he said there. So she glares at Gorman, she walks away with the food tray, and she walks down the hallway, and she passes Dawn giving laundry orders to someone. And Dawn is a very, interesting character, because you don't know if she's good or bad. You don't know if she's telling the truth. She definitely is a very interesting character because of that, and I definitely really enjoyed that. I will say at this point in the episode, some scenes were a little bit slow. I was not exactly into it at this point. I was like, okay, this is a little bit slow, but I still was enjoying it. It wasn't like the Governor episode, which was honestly just a snooze fest in my opinion. Looking back, it wasn't, but when I first watched it, I didn't really like it. So Beth says that, and whatever the food, basically, she walks down and she delivers the tray of food to Steven in his office, and he's listening to a record and explains that it's one of the few perks he gets for being the only doctor there. And Beth says that, and whatever the food is, and Steven replies that it's a guinea pig, which is really weird, and Steven asks Beth where her food is, and Beth says the more she takes, the more she owes, and Steven tells Beth to sit down and gives her part of his food. And she looks at a painting in Steven's office, and Steven says it's a Caravaggio, and that he found it on the streets like trash, and Steven says it doesn't have a place anymore because art isn't about survival, and Beth says that she still sings, because we know that she does, which I thought was, interesting, because, we know she does that. So Dawn and another officer are wheeling in someone else they found him. Dawn says they found his ID, and his name is Gavin Trevitt, and he fell from a first-floor apartment to get away from some walkers. And Steven says that he's losing blood and he doesn't think he can save him. And Steven says this one's a loser and they shouldn't waste the resources. And Dawn tells Steven that today she wants him to try. Steven says Trevitt has a punctured lung. He asks Beth for a hollow needle. Steven stabs a patient in the chest. Blood spurts out of his lung, but the patient seems to stabilize. And Dawn asks if the patient is going to make it. But Steven says it was a waste of resources. And Dawn suddenly slaps Beth in the face, and I was like, why is she abusing Beth here? If she's trying to save her, why is she abusing her? I mean, that definitely didn't make sense to me, why that was going on. I mean, like, she wants to save her at the same time she's abusing her. Like, what are we talking about here? That doesn't make any sense to me, definitely. I thought that was really, really weird what's going on there. So, basically, she slaps her, and, basically, Dawn says, see, try to grasp the stakes here. And later that day, Beth asks Steven if Dawn is always like that. And Steven says only on her bad days, which is the only kind that she has. She only has bad days. So Steven tells Beth that Noah left her a new shirt. And after Steven leaves, Beth reaches into the shirt to find a green lollipop. And we can tell right away that Noah is very good friends with Beth. And then Dawn and Gorman are bringing in a woman named Joan who has been bitten. And Dawn tells Joan, you've got two choices here. She's got two choices. Either they cut off her arm or, she does it. So Joan's yelling at Gorman, and Gorman goes around like he's going to attack her, but Dawn tells Gorman to get out, and Beth starts to walk around, but Dawn says they need Beth to hold Joan down. And Joan's yelling that she's not going back to him, and Dawn says that she doesn't have to. Joan says that Dawn can't control them, and Dawn responds that she will. And as Beth and Dawn hold Joan down, Steven cuts off Joan's arm above the bite mark, and that was definitely a really intense scene. So Beth is then walking on a man doing ironing, and the man introduces himself as Noah and says he sent her the lollipop. And this guy, Noah, I really liked his character. He's actually Tyler James Williams, the guy from Everybody Hates Chris. I thought he was actually, out of all the characters that we got introduced to, I liked his character the most. I thought his character was definitely really good, and I really liked the dynamic between him and Beth. Did I like it as much as Daryl and Beth? No, because I personally do like Daryl and Beth. I ship them together. I think they'd be good together. I do like Daryl and Carol, but if I had to pick, I'd say probably Daryl and Beth. I just think they have more chemistry, in my opinion, and I would like to see the two of them together. So Beth asks Noah if he knew what happened with Joan, that she couldn't have just stayed and worked a while and left, and Noah says that it doesn't work like that. And he reveals that he's actually been there for about a year, and Noah shows Beth his injured leg, and Noah says that he and his dad were both messed up when they found them, and they told them that they could only save one. So Noah says that they didn't really save his dad because he was bigger and stronger and could have fought back. And Noah says that he's out of there when the time is right, and he tells Beth that he's from Richmond, Virginia, where they had walls. Now, I thought that was definitely really interesting what he said, because, of course, if we had to talk about who is the weakest out of all members of the group here, Beth comes to mind. She's not very she's very defenseless. She's not very tough or anything. When you think of the people that haven't killed a walker, Beth has never killed a walker. Beth has never done anything that dramatic. She's never really had an impact on anyone, and I definitely agree with Noah saying that. I definitely thought that was interesting, and that's why Beth is there, basically. So Beth is working, and Dawn brings her a tray of food, and Beth says that she doesn't need much because she's not staying any longer than they make her, and Dawn says that she shouldn't see this as a sense because she's giving her food, clothing, and protection, and Dawn says that if they take her back, it's only fair. So Dawn tells Beth to keep working off what she owes, and she'll be out of there in no time, and she says she knows that Beth didn't ask for this, but she didn't either, and Beth starts eating. So, what's really interesting here is that it seems like everything's okay, but there's something about Dawn that really seemed very creepy to me, and this show is a horror show, so obviously something is not going to turn out right here. I knew that something was wrong here, and you can tell right away that, it doesn't seem right. There's something here that's definitely not right. So Beth is mopping sorry guys, I got tongue-tied there. Beth is mopping blood off the floor of Joan's room, and she's humming. And Joan wakes up and tells Beth that's really nice, and Beth offers to go get the doctor, but Joan says to wait, and Joan tells Beth that Dawn can control them, but she doesn't, and because it's easier. And Beth asks what Gorman did to her, but Joan says it doesn't matter, that it's easy to make a deal with the devil when you're not the one paying the price. So I thought that was a very good line. And Beth is washing up, then she starts looking for something under her bed, and Gorman walks in and asks Beth if she lost something, and Gorman pulls out the green lollipop and starts sucking on it. And Gorman says she can have a taste, but Beth refuses, and Gorman keeps insisting, and Beth reluctantly sucks on the lollipop. Steven comes in, tells Gorman to leave Beth alone. Gorman says the girl should have been his. Steven says no one is his, and he's not getting Joan back. Gorman says he's getting Joan back, and Dawn isn't going to stop him. And it kind of seems like Gorman's the good guy here, and Steven and Joan are the bad guys, because you can definitely tell that there's something wrong with Steven and Joan, that Gorman can definitely tell. So I didn't really know what it was at this point, but it's really interesting what's going on here. So I was like, okay, this is really interesting. So basically, Steven asks Gorman what happens when he gets sick, but Gorman says he thinks there's going to be somebody who's not him. So Beth asks Steven why he stays there when he could leave whenever he wanted, and Steven takes Beth to the ground floor. He rattles a bar across the window, which attracts a bunch of walkers from the outside, and I was like, okay, definitely this episode's about to get intense, because right now this episode is very dialogue-driven, very dry, not the typical episode of The Walking Dead, and then, of course, it gets really intense. So he takes Beth to the roof, and he says that when everything happened that Dawn reported to a guy named Hanson, they had orders to clear the hospital and move everyone to Butler Park. But after the city fell, they kept mostly to themselves until the food ran out. So they go on food runs and found people who need help, and Dawn initially said that they couldn't spare the resources. But Steven struck a deal with her, and Steven would do his best to heal people hurting, and then they would compensate them for their resources. So he said that Hanson cracked and made some calls that got people killed, but Dawn took care of them and kept them alive. So he says as bad as it gets, it's still better than down there, and he asked Beth to look in on Gavin and give him 75 milligrams of clozapine, and she's grinding up clozapine to make a shot, but she injects it into Jeff's arm. Noah says, and asks her if she's still at it, and he then starts, Gavin then starts convulsing, and the life support machine goes off, and he's dead. So I was kind of thinking something. I was thinking this shot basically kills people. So Dawn stabs him in the head so he doesn't turn into a walker, obviously, and she looks at Beth and demands to know what she did to him. And Beth says she does not know, and Noah says that he tripped over the ventilator while he was mopping and must have unplugged it, and Dawn tells Gorman to take Noah to her office. So Beth tells Steven that's not what happened, that he just started seizing, and Steven asks if Beth gave her a certain drug, but Beth says no, and that she gave him clozapine, and Steven says that he didn't say clozapine, but Beth hears Noah being beaten, but Steven stops Beth from going to help, and I was like, okay, something weird is definitely going on here at this point. So Dawn goes and tells Beth that she knows that Noah was lying, and Beth asks Dawn why she punished Noah if she knew he didn't do it, and Dawn says that she didn't want to do that because she had to, and Dawn says a good man's mistakes almost killed him, and she's not going to let that happen again. Dawn tells Beth that every sacrifice has to be for the greater good. And says that Beth isn't strong, but Beth says that she is. And I think this was definitely really interesting. Basically, I don't think Beth is strong here. And she ends up pulling up Beth's arm and says she saw the slash marks on her wrist the night she came in, and she tells Beth that some people just aren't meant for this life, which is okay, as long as they don't take advantage of the ones that are. So, I thought that was definitely really interesting what she's saying, because in this life, some people, no, they're not meant for it. Some people are not for this apocalypse. Some people don't belong in this apocalypse, and I definitely agree with what Dawn is saying there, and I thought that was definitely very interesting. So Beth is then talking to Noah. He's all beaten up, and he says it's not as bad as it looks. And Noah says that Dawn needed Gavin for something that's why she's upset about it. So Beth says she's not going to make a run for it with Noah, and he says that Dawn keeps a spare key to the elevator hallway somewhere in her office, and he says he'll keep Dawn distracted if she'll go find it. So while Noah's helping Dawn clean up, Beth searches Dawn's office, finds an ID card, which she stares at for a while, but then she notices a puddle of blood on the floor, and it's Joan. Joan has opened her wound and bled to death. She basically killed herself, pretty much. She pries an open drawer and finds Dawn's key. And then Gorman suddenly opens the door. And Beth says that Dawn was asking for a key, but Gorman says that he was just with Dawn. And this is a very creepy scene, the way this was going. This was definitely very creepy. Gorman says that maybe Dawn doesn't have to know that maybe there's another solution. He starts sniffing Beth, and Beth notices Joan's body starting to turn. And Beth agrees to work something out with Gorman, and Gorman starts to put his hand up Beth's shirt, and Beth hits Gorman over the head with a jar of lollipops. Basically, we find out that Gorman basically is a perv, which I thought that was an amazing twist. She hits him with the jar of lollipops from Dawn's desk. From here on out, Beth is like a badass here. I thought this was amazing. Joan comes back as a walker and bites him. Beth is walking down the hallway. She runs into Dawn and Noah. Beth tells Dawn that Joan is looking for her, that she saw her and Gorman head toward her office. And Dawn's heading to her office. Noah goes with Beth down the hallway to the elevator shaft. And as they hear screams in the background, Noah ties a rope made of towels around Beth, lowers her down the elevator shaft. And after Beth reaches a ledge near her bathroom, Noah then starts to climb down the shaft himself. And as he's going down, a walker arm reaches out, grabs at him. He slips and falls on the bodies at the bottom of the shaft. And Beth jumps to the rest of the way down to help Noah. And as they make their way out to the tunnel, walkers came after them, but Beth has a gun that she likely took from Gorman, and she shoots some walkers that are in their way. And after they are outside, Noah's hobbling, and I thought this was so awesome what happened there, because this is the very first time ever that Beth has ever killed a walker. Beth has always been afraid. Beth has always been very much of a pussy. She hasn't really wanted to do it. She's had people do things for her. You know, Daryl has done things for her. Many people have done things for her. But for once, she actually killed a walker, and I thought that was amazing. I thought that was amazingly written, and just, wow, that was such great writing, because you know, it's the first time all season, you know, it's the first time in the entire show where Beth has killed a walker. So this episode really did mean something. If anyone said this episode was just filler, no, it wasn't, because Beth finally killed a walker, and this gets rid of, now officially every character on the show is no longer innocent, because Beth was the innocent one. She was the one that didn't do anything violent. She was the one that was just, you know, very upset about things. But now, finally, she's no longer innocent, and I love that about her character. I already really like Beth's character, but after this, I think she is an ultimate badass, and I love that about her character. If they continue to write her as good as they are right now, you know, have her be badass, but also heartfelt, I would love that about her character. So Noah's running past the walkers, goes outside the gate. Some officers from inside show up and start shooting the walkers. He gets away, but the officers take Beth, and Dawn asks Beth who she thinks she is, and Beth says that Gorman attacked her just like he attacked Joan, and she tells Dawn that no one is coming, that they are all going to die, and I think, you know, that is true, and Dawn ends up hitting Beth and knocks her out, and you know, it looked like that was the end of the episode, because then the episode went to black, but it turns out that she just knocked her out, and Beth wakes up, and Steven looks at Beth and tells her that she's doing better, and Beth asks Steven how long he knew Gavin was a doctor, which she likely figured out from the ID she found in Dawn's office, which I thought was definitely really interesting. And Beth says that that's why Steven had him give Gavin the wrong meds. And Steven says that he knew Gavin from before and knew he was an oncologist. And Steven said that if they had another doctor, then Dawn would have kicked him out, maybe even killed him. So definitely Dawn is someone to be worried about, because Dawn will kill people if she has to. She is very jealous of what happens. You know, if things do not go her way, she will kill people. So Stephen gives the example that Peter denied being one of Christ's disciples because they would have crucified him too. So that's really creepy, definitely. So Beth walks down the hall with sharp scissors in her hand, heading toward Stephen. She then sees several walkers wheeling someone in, and you know, she can see that definitely it's not going to be good. She looks down and I love the way this episode ends. She's looking down and it's Carol. So I was correct. They took Carol. She's on the gurney. She's battered and bruised. Probably they beat her up and everything, and that's what happened to Carol. So definitely, that was an amazing twist. I love what happened there. I knew that Carol was kidnapped, and I love where this episode is going. First of all, I love seeing Beth no longer be such a pussy about things. I love that they finally have her be very, you know, badass now. I love that she is a lot more interesting now. Her character is so well written now, definitely. Just because the way this episode was done, I thought that was amazing. I thought just the whole episode itself was amazing. I know if some people thought this episode was boring, I could see that, but definitely this episode I thought was definitely very important because not only did it focus on Beth, who was a character who we didn't have too much focus on, but it did give us a really awesome twist, and definitely they are heading to the hospital, okay? That confirms that they are going to get Beth out of this hospital because we know that Dawn is not someone you can trust. Dawn will kill people if she has to, and that's what she's going to do. She's going to kill people if she has to, and it's that simple. That's what she'll do. But overall, guys, I thought this episode was definitely very well done. No, it was not the best episode of the season. There were some scenes that dragged on a little bit. I did think that it was probably the weakest episode of the season so far, but that doesn't say anything because I'm still loving this season. And it was a much stronger episode than, it wasn't like the ones we got last year where there were just individual episodes about this certain character or this certain character. I was fine with that, but this was definitely more of an intense episode, and I'm really looking forward to the next episode, which is basically going to be Abraham and his group going to Washington. My only complaint is I really hope they don't do the thing they did last year, which is just show individual groups and what they're doing. I hope they don't do that, because I did like that they did that, but I feel like if they did that now, it'd be more interesting. I just hope they keep this interesting, definitely. Because there were some scenes in this episode that I kind of was like, I don't really care what's going on here. But I did really overall enjoy this episode. I thought it was really good. Let me know what you guys saw of this episode. I personally really enjoyed it. If you guys didn't enjoy it, I can understand why. What do you think of the character development, Beth? I thought that was amazing. What do you think is going to happen with Carol? Definitely there's something else going on with this hospital. Let me know what you guys think is going on there. Do you think that the hospital's kind of lying? I feel like definitely they're trying to justify what they did, and they know what they did was wrong, but they're trying to justify it. So I'll have to see what happens there. But that's my review. Hope you guys enjoy. See you guys in my next video, which will be my review for tonight's episode of Homeland, which I have not watched yet, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.